Amen. Thank you. Please be seated. Good morning, everyone. It's so good to see you. And we have kind of jumped into a series on prayer. Well, we haven't kind of done it, we've really done it. But we're going to continue that with facing your giants. There's no way for any of us to ever overcome any major thing in our life without a relationship with God through prayer. So please understand when we're talking about over the next 3 weeks, including today, we're going to look at how the story of David and Goliath relates to you and I. Today, we're going to go specifically to how to face your giants. Next week, we're going to back up just a little bit and look at, again, the story of David and look at how those issues that he experienced personally affected him and him facing Goliath. And then we're going to look at the conclusion of that story. So, the reason God chose David to be the next king of Israel was a number of reasons. We've got to understand it. I want you to personalize the message today. When I'm speaking about David and God and Goliath, I'm also speaking about Junior. I'm speaking about me and David and Goliath and God. And I'm putting myself there, and I want you to put yourself in that story, because I know there's not an individual in this room that's not facing some giant today. I know the reality of human nature and what we go through, but there were some things about David that distinguished him and how God was able to choose him to be the one to overcome this incredible obstacle in the life of the family of Israel. He was a humble man. And the experience of David was that he was very passionate in his relationship with God. As a matter of fact, he trusted God with his whole heart, and he was called a friend of God. The very fact that even though he had been anointed as the next king of Israel, he still didn't change his life. He was still the same person that he was before. He was just happened to be the king. Not only that, but it wasn't his outward appearance wasn't the reason he was selected. It wasn't his physical abilities. It didn't make him, any more special than anyone else. Those weren't the reasons why God selected him. And in life, we have to understand that the Bible and the stories that are given to us to find application. And the way that we overcome prayer, overcome these giants in our lives, is through our personal relationship with God and how He encourages us. Tracy handed out to a number of you the 7 stations of prayer, and what we would encourage you, if you didn't get one of those, is to write down those prayer requests and to share them with us over the next few weeks so that we can apply them to our prayer list, and then we can move them from those 6 stations to the prayer of praise that God's answered those prayers. And you can see already God's working. He's answered, as Cindy said, 3 of hers already in this 1 week. And God does that. In the Bible, in 1 Samuel chapter 17, we find this story. It says, "Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle. And they were gathering in Socoh, which belonged to Judah, and they camped between Socoh and Azekah and Ephes-dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and camped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in battle array to encounter the Philistines." So we've got a throwdown about to happen. And that's how it is in our lives when we're facing our giants. They don't relent. They're there. They're going to be at work tomorrow. You're going to have to face them. They're going to be in your home when you go home. They're going to be with you when that individual that comes down the grocery aisle that you can't deal with walks down that aisle. They're going to be those voices in your head from the abuses or the difficulties or the struggles that you faced throughout your whole life with family members or individuals. When I was a little boy, I rode the bus to school and back home, and I always enjoyed that because we lived 4.5 miles out of town, and I got to ride the bus, and I got to just get away from home for a little bit. Well, we had a new neighborhood family move in, and Rusty was a bully. Rusty was bigger than me, and he'd pick on me on the bus, and I was scared. And he'd actually grab me when I was trying to get to the bus, and he would threaten me, and do all this stuff and everything. And he scared me to death, and so I really struggled with him every day. And so I got to where I didn't want to ride the bus anymore. And not only that, but we played football every weekend, and all the kids in the neighborhood played. And so Rusty also would come to play football with us. I'd be afraid of him. And that went on for a long time until my sister, Joan, who comes here occasionally with Mike, decided to confront him. And he didn't do that anymore. And she faced him for me. He was a giant in my life. And that's what's going on. They're about to encounter one another. And the Philistines, it says, stood on the mountain on one side, and Israel was on the mountain on the other side, the valley between them. And it says, and then this champion, now it's important to recognize that. This champion came out from the armies of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. And he had a bronze helmet he had on his head, and he was clothed with a scale armor, which weighed 5,000 shekels of bronze. He also had bronze greaves on his legs and a bronze javelin slung between his shoulders. And the shaft of the spear was like a weaver's beam, and the head of his spear weighed 600 shekels of iron. His shield carrier also walked before him, and he stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel and said to them, "Why do you come out to draw up in battle array? Am I not the Philistine, and you the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail and kill him, then you shall be our servants to serve us." And again the Philistines said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." And so you see this huge giant, 9.5 feet tall, this man, come to fight and to argue with them every day. So let's just kind of put it in perspective. The Valley of Elah was a very narrow ravine. It was more like a vast canyon, actually, and it was over a mile wide in some places that we know about. And they were prepared for battle, and they had done this psychological warfare that was going on for 40 days. And so every day, this dude would come out there, and they were camped on one side of the hill and Israel on the other side. And this canyon was separated by a creek down in the bottom of it, and there were both sides. They sloped up for about a half a mile. So it wasn't like here and real deep. It was actually sloped up. And I want you to understand the whole landscape, because that's important. Because when we fight our giants, it's usually on familiar territory. It's in our jobs, it's in our homes, it's in our community, it's in our relationships and areas that we face in our lives. And so the fourth verse actually introduces the Philistine named Goliath, and it says it's for 40 days. Now, think about that for a minute. Saul and his soldiers, including David's 3 older brothers, were scared to death. And every morning and every evening, Goliath would walk out into the valley where everyone could see him, and he literally taunted the Israelites. And so, over 9.5 feet tall. But the thing that probably bothered them more than anything else was his big mouth. That's just like someone that's trying to create issues, and they know what they're doing. And his mouth was constantly saying things of what he was going to do and how he was going to destroy them and how they were scared and it belittled him. And we all know people like that in our lives. We all have experienced circumstances like that in our life that says, you're never going to get there. You're never going to make it. It's not going to change for you. This is how it is. Your back's not going to get better. You might as well just deal with it. It's going to hurt in the morning just like it did yesterday. It's not going to get any better for you at work. They don't really see your value. You're just replaceable. It's not going to matter at school because they're never going to include you. It's not going to happen for you. This is just not what is meant to happen in your life. And so what we find is David rushed to meet and greet his brothers. And as he was walking or talking to them, Goliath walks out and he begins to do this taunt on the Israelites again. And so Saul, interestingly enough, had devised an incentive plan. It included money, which was important. The person that was going to fight Goliath was going to get paid a lot of money. He was also going to get Saul's daughter as a bride. And the father of this guy was going to be exempt from paying taxes. So it wasn't working, though. David went to the king, though, and he told him that he was willing to fight Goliath. And so David had told Saul what he had done when he had fought the lion and the bear, and how they came to attack his sheep and he had overcome them. And so Saul was pretty impressed with his courage. He even tried to give David his armor as from the king so that he could fight against him, but it didn't fit him. It didn't work. And so David instead chose to go and battle with the weapons he was familiar with. That was the shepherd's staff and his slingshot. So David stopped at the creek and he picked up 5 smooth stones. Picked them up. Had them in his bag. And so Goliath said, "You're just a boy. You come against me with this stick in your hand like you're coming against a dog." And he said, "But it's not going to do any good against me. You're not going to make it." But I want you to notice what David said here in verse 4. It says, he responded by saying, "You have come into battle today with a sword and a shield, but I have come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel that you have defiled." He continued by saying, "And today he is going to deliver you into my hands, and I will cut off your head. And not only will I feed your body, but the bodies of all the Philistines," he says, "that are with you, to the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth. Then the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel." That's what he said. Pretty bold statement. Oh, I got this. I walk into work tomorrow, doesn't matter who you are. Doesn't matter how much of a bully you are, I can handle you. Doesn't matter how big your mouth is. You're just going to yank like a dog. I mean, that's just how it is. Oh, I come home and you start in on me. Just keep going. Just talk all you want, because I know who I am. See, prayer does that to us. It gives encouragement in us. It builds courage inside of us to stand against things that we can't stand against. That's why in school you can stand up and become anything you want to be. People don't define you. They try. Circumstances don't define you. It tries. It comes out every day and tells you how ineffective and inadequate you are, but that's not how God sees you. God sees you as a warrior, as a victor, as someone that He created wonderfully and fearfully for a purpose and for a reason that is bigger and beyond anything that may be trying to hold you back. And that's all it is, by the way, trying to hold you back. So David didn't back down. He started moving closer to David to attack him. So David moved forward. In fact, he started running toward Goliath, and he was swinging that slingshot above his head. He got close enough, and he let it go, and it struck Goliath right between the eyes. And he went down. David didn't hesitate one moment. He ran over to where the giant was laying, and he took his own sword out of the scabbard, and he used it to cut off his head. Uh-oh. That changed the whole game. That changed everything. So here's what we need to do and understand if we're going to face our giants. We need to understand, first of all, that Goliath was very intimidating, and our giants are too. Matter of fact, they scare us. They cause us to not do what we know we should be doing. 9.5 feet tall. He was a professional soldier. He probably had this booming voice that you could hear coming. You know that voice, right? Maybe at work you hear them coming. And you like all of a sudden get unsettled, or they come in the house or wherever, or you're out in public and you hear them and before you ever see them. Verse 11 tells us that when Saul and the Israelites heard Goliath's issue, his challenge, that they were terrified and they were deeply shaken. Every day, 40 days. Later in verse 24, it says that when the Israelites saw Goliath, that they all began to run away from him in fear. And so undoubtedly the very sight of this man and the sound of his voice scared them deeply. So some of you, like the people of Philistine, are here this morning and you're facing emotional giants like worry or doubt or even fear or anxiety. Some of you are facing mental giants like stress or insecurity or even depression. Some are facing physical giants like disease or pain or even a disability. For some of you, Goliath may be a bad habit or an addiction that you just can't seem to kick. Some of you, it's a problem at work or at school, a subject that you're struggling with, or maybe it's a financial problem or that just won't go away, but it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it looks like it's 9.5 feet tall. And it won't stop. It won't stop. So your choice is like David's choice and like everyone else in this story, is we can listen to the giant and we can be miserable, or we can choose to believe the voice of truth that comes from God and put our faith and trust in Him and let Him defeat the giant just as He did Goliath. The second lesson that we learn here, I think, is not only what all of us are experiencing when we face this giant emotionally, mentally, but also that we can learn from this story that David and Goliath, giants often have accomplices. They're usually never alone. Maybe he was jealous, or maybe he just didn't want his kid brother, to do something that would embarrass him in front of him. But the accomplice was not only, it wasn't only he had to fight Goliath, he had to fight his brother, someone very close to him. And sometimes it's someone extremely close to us that says, well, you can't do that. It's not going to get any better. You might as well deal with it. That's just how life is. Oh, until you change this, what's the old saying? The definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing over and over and expect change. It doesn't happen that way. And so we're told this, and there's something we all need to learn here. David was just asking a question, and he hadn't even said anything about fighting Goliath yet, but his brother was already trying to put him in his place. He said to him, actually, what are you doing here anyway? What did you do with the sheep you were supposed to be watching out in the desert? Shouldn't you be somewhere else? You need to just back off and get in your place. So it's not just the giants we face, and people tell us, oh, just get over it. Just deal with it. That's how it is with life. No. That's not how it is in life. God is able to do anything that is above and beyond what we could ever possibly imagine or think, because He's God. And we can't allow our giants to tell us that that's not true. But that's what we've done. And that's how we are. And so we need to remember who the enemy is, and instead of focus on him or the enemy, instead of wasting our time fighting one another. That doesn't get us anywhere. It's easy to lash out at one another. But the Apostle Paul said it this way. He said, our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers of the air. We're not fighting one another. David wasn't fighting Goliath. He was fighting the presence of an enemy that was greater than Goliath, and that was evil. And he knew that God was able to overcome that, just as He is today. King Saul even tried to discourage David. He said this in verse 33. He said, don't be ridiculous. There is no way you can fight this guy. You're only a boy, and he has been in the army since he was a boy. It didn't make sense. Just like our lives don't make sense when people say and we say to them, we're going to try to do something. They just look at us and they say it can't happen. How many times, let me ask you this, have you heard someone in a church say something like this? You know, so-and-so might be a great teacher, but they're so young. I don't know if we should let them do that. Or maybe that's a great idea to minister to people in our community, but we're too small, we're too limited. We can't really be effective and do anything because we're not big enough. And so those things kind of become little giants that get bigger and bigger in our lives and in the lives of everyone else. I want you to see that David exercised his faith instead of being paralyzed by fear. He knew what it meant to walk by faith and not by sight. Saul and the rest of the Israelites saw the situation through human eyes. And remember, I've talked to you many times since I started preaching here about looking from God's eyes or from your eyes. God's viewpoint is not our viewpoint. God gives us His viewpoint in the Word of God. And when He says what He says in the Bible, He means what He says. And God acts on what He says. And we have to trust Him in His time and in His power to be able to do what we can never possibly imagine or think is possible. They saw Goliath and they were paralyzed. He didn't see Goliath as a threat, David did. Instead, he saw him as an opportunity for God to be glorified. Oh, yeah, she's a big mouth. Don't worry about her. We'll fix her. We'll take care of that. We will. She's a bully. He thinks he can do anything he wants to do. That's not how it's going to be. You know, just keep talking. It's going to be all right. Oh, yeah, I know. I hate to go to the mailbox because I know it's going to be another issue I've got to overcome or deal with. But it's going to be okay. It's going to work out. See, Jonathan Falwell said this. He said, so many Christians never achieve the maximum potential in their lives is because they never conquer the thing that they fear the most. Let me tell you what I used to fear the most. I'll tell you. When I had a car wreck in 2005 and was diagnosed in 2010 with a traumatic brain injury that was developing stroke-level headaches and was getting worse. And I remember going through cognitive therapy, and the first thing I did was move the baby kangaroo to the mama kangaroo, the correct one, on the computer. It was the hardest thing I could do. I couldn't. I had issues. Obviously, I still have issues. And so if anything's ever wrong with me, I always tell people I have a head injury. And it's true, though. And having dealt with that in that experience caused me to have all kinds of setbacks. I got to the point where they couldn't figure out what it was, and they thought I had a brain tumor. Didn't have a brain tumor. Had MRI. They thought possibly I had an onset of dementia or Alzheimer's, and I didn't have that. At the end of it all, they diagnosed me by brain mapping me through in-depth technological studies on the areas of my brain. And what they discovered was I had a third grade level, math level, third grade. And I'd always struggled with math. I always had that issue. So my biggest fear was having to ever do mathematical figures. That's just one of my fears that I've experienced in my life. And so I struggled with that. Guess what I became? A finance manager. Scared yet, Brent? Don't be, buddy. We're going to make it. But I struggled with that, and I faced that because that was my greatest fear at the moment. I couldn't at the moment go back to pastoring or preaching because I had to get well. And the only thing I could do was this. And after a few months of working in that business, and I've done that for quite a while now, and I'm very excited about how God's done those things. So that was one of my fears. The Israelites feared Goliath because he seemed invincible, and that's how it is when you face your giants. You can't get past it. And I'm preaching to you this morning telling you that you can. The whole mistake they made was believing that their future depended on their own abilities instead of trusting God to deliver them. And I want to tell you, nothing in our lives is going to be able to be done with ourselves alone. We can't do it by ourselves. We need the power of God. Courage comes when we live by faith and not by sight. Courage comes because we have confidence in God's power and not our limited power. Another thing that I see in the story is, in the face of unbeatable odds, David was confident that he would prevail. The confidence was a result of a couple of things. First of all, David had saw what God had done in his life when he faced the other enemies, like the lion and the bear that were attacking his life. I want to just ask you to do something this week. I want to ask you to stop for a moment, maybe throughout your day, and think about past victories that you've had in your life. Think about them. Maybe even write them out. I want you to recall times when God protected you and He provided for you, when He actually did those things, to see it, to look at it, to think through it. I want you to reminisce about times when He delivered you from situations that seemed hopeless. And just go back through those times. God can do it again because He's God. And your enemies aren't bigger than God. And that's what David did. He went into battle with confidence, knowing that the source of his strength was God and not himself. This made no sense. You look at this in any algorithm, any scale that you lay out, any matrix put together, it made no sense for David to win over Goliath. That's why it's a great story. And it's used in every situation. Knowing that God would empower him and give him strength to accomplish the task at hand gave David the courage he needed to fight and to defeat this man twice his size and probably twice his age. Psalm 28:7 says, "The Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusts in Him, and I am helped." Great story. The last lesson I want us to consider this morning, and I want to mention about this, and we're going to look at this a little bit more next week and the following week. The giants we face can bring us closer to God, or they can point out our spiritual weaknesses. Many of the problems that David faced in life brought him closer to God. On the other hand, Saul and Eliab, it took them away from God because it showed their lack of faith, their lack of trust. What about you this morning? What about you? What about me? You have the faith it takes to stand up against Goliath, because you're going to have to. He's not going to go away. He's going to keep at you. The question is, are you willing to trust God instead of your own abilities? Because there are things that you just can't possibly do. God's got to do it. Are you willing to walk by faith and not by sight? I don't see any way out of this to overcome this giant in my life. I'm never going to pass this subject this year. I'm never going to get that promotion at work. I'm never going to have what I want to be closer to my family. The finances aren't going to work out. My health is not going to get better. Let me assure you that it's not by sight, but it's by faith that we overcome the giants that we deal with every day of our lives. Who are you going to listen to? Are you going to listen to him come out every day for 40 days until someone stands up and says, all right, that's enough. That's enough. That's what my sister did to Rusty. She said, okay, that's enough. You leave him alone or you deal with me. And he stopped. Rusty and I became good friends, by the way. We got closer after that. He was always older than me, and I kind of looked up to him in a lot of ways about various things. He was a good guy. He just needed to be straightened out by my sis, who did. So I don't know this week what you got to deal with. I know what some of us have to deal with. I know that they come unexpectedly walking into the arena and they start yelling out what they're going to do to us. But listen to the voice of God. How you do that is through your relationship with God through prayer. Praying connects us with God that changes us and never changes Him. It gives us courage and strengthens us to know that we can overcome. And some of us even have to go to the point that we've not got to yet where we need to fast and pray. We'll get there. It's a process. Well, what we have to do now is know that you're here for a reason this morning, for a purpose. And God has brought you to where you are right now so that you need to know this. I don't know everything you're going through, but I promise you if I can help you get through it, I'm going to do it. You don't have to face your giants by yourself. Because I'm praying for you. I don't know all of your needs, but I'm asking God to move your giants to the prayer list of praise. To know that He's answered them and you've overcome them, that you're okay with them. That you're going to be all right. I'm never going to dunk a basketball. But I don't care about that anymore. As a kid, I did. There are things that are more important to me in life now that matter to me, that make me understand my significance and my purpose. And they're beyond anything I could have ever possibly imagined or thought. The places God's taken me, the things God's shown me, the graces and the mercies God's given me, the amazing blessings that He's provided for me. He is able to do those things even beyond what I even can possibly imagine or think. Why? Because He's God and He's able. I'm going to ask Stretch to come up and conclude our service this morning, and I hope you'll come back next week. And if you would, please write down the prayer requests for the 7 stations, minus the prayer of confession, unless you want us to pray for your issues like that. And bring them back next week so that we can put them on our prayer list and so that we can pray with you and help you in those situations. But remember, the giants that you face in life are not greater and bigger than God is. Stretch.
Amen. Brenda, if you could come up here. And folks, if anybody want to come with me and just pray with Brenda, we have some very insurmountable, seemed like, giants, truly, as far as policy and bureaucracy, the help we need to take care of Alan at the house. We think of how he's going to run and play the guitar again, but right now he's bedridden and it's quite difficult he has to be stretched and fed and helped. And I say that seeing the hope in the future, though, that he's going to be playing guitar for us one day here on the stage. Father, we come to you, and what I'm thinking about right now is who you are and not how I think. I think of your love and your patience and your mercy, your long suffering, and how you're always just loving people. You're doing what's best for others. So I ask, first of all, for this wonderful, wonderful caretaker, Brenda, that you would fill her with your character and your power. And as I walk in the house and see Alan, I already see your character because she's denying everything about her and caring for her son. And that's just a blessing to my life. And if more people could see that, they would believe in God. And I would just ask you to bless her heart and her willpower just because you're doing like you would do. She's given up her job, her livelihood, all hope of normalcy and just taking care of her son, hand and foot for 24/7 every day. And I'm so glad her daughter was here so she could be with us today. So that's a big prayer, just continue to fill her with strength and power. And then these just political bureaucracy things that just keep coming in the way of our right to care for people at home, and the way things have to be dotted and crossed, and by a certain timeline and be a certain age and be a certain classification. Lord, I pray all that would go aside, and she would get the food she needs, the materials she needs, everything to care for Alan at the house the way it should be. Caring for our own, showing your love at the house. So I just pray for all that to happen. And then there's just practical things. She can't work for a living. Lord, I pray you just bless her continue to bless this church as we bless her, helping her. And all the other little things that need to be taken care of, the yard, the electric bills, everything about a home. Lord, just make people understand how to step up. I just pray this whole situation would be one emergency after another where people just say, you know what, I'm gonna get out of my routine and start helping like you do, Father. And I pray for Alan especially, that you would continue to bless his physical recovery, bless every brain fiber that needs healed, that would come back to normal. And bless the swallowing, all the practical things we take for granted. This voice I have and my ability to eat and normal and swallow, those are things I need you to bless Alan with, please. Or teach us. I'm under your authority, God. You're teaching me just how great it is to be alive as I see Alan. So help us learn, but I'm not afraid to ask for the miracle either. Lord, I pray you would just bless him with physical healing, but help us all to learn how to help in the meantime. Help the community to learn how to help her family to learn how to help, aside from differences. And I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you all.
Thanks, folks. See you next week.